All right. Why don't we get started with a brief introduction from Michael Golovter, the director of the Yale Center for Environmental Justice.
Hello, everybody. I'm Michael Golovter. I'm the executive director of the Yale Center for Environmental Justice, and really thrilled to host the first of 3 webinars on the Land Justice Toolkit that we've taken a couple years to produce and are really excited to get out. And I can't think of a better time. The Yale Center for Environmental Justice is a fairly new entity at Yale. It's been around about almost just under 3 years, and we work in 4 areas: classical environmental justice work. We have an Environmental Joy Conference. Um, uh, and this work is in our portfolio of classical environmental justice work, which I'll talk about in a second. Energy justice, climate justice, and indigenous programs, where this report also overlaps in that arena as well. And I think that we're really excited to get this report out, particularly now, given the political environment in the country. I think it's so critical for all of us to understand how vital all of our rights are and our relationship to nature is at a time when things are being so challenged. I think, a lot of times when you do environmental justice work, I think people think like we're doing it because it's the right thing to do, and justice is really important, all of which is really, really true. But the reality is we can't get to the places we need to go. We can't get back to the places we have been without justice. Land, there are very few land conservation efforts in this country that don't predominantly depend on a diverse constituency for their support, even if that diverse constituency never gets out to those territories or those places. We talk even in Connecticut about the value of how important and vital inner city legislators and inner city voters are to the support of land conservation. And this work, we hope, will help both in indigenous communities and people of color communities and white communities to understand how connected we are, and also to help us build the power we need to save and preserve as much land as possible, because we are still an electoral system, and in that electoral system, voters are power, and the more we can all participate in the things we're voting for, the things we're protecting. And make no mistake, the protection of land in this country depends, just like the protection of climate, depends heavily on voters of color and diverse communities. The more we can make those connections, redress injustice, and move forward in regimes, natural resource regimes, and environmental regimes that represent everybody and represent our cultures and our interests and our concerns and bring us all benefits, the better off we'll all be. So we're really excited with this first panel, and please tune in for the next 2 also. And I'll pass it on to Tegan, who is an amazing advocate who works with us in the Center for Business and Environment at Yale on all these issues. And thanks to Zoe and Tegan especially for pulling this together. I am not in Margaritaville, but I am on a beach in Luanda, Angola, where separately in our climate justice work, we're doing work on climate migration. This is the only time I'm getting to the beach, so please don't give me any crap about it. It's Friday night here in Angola, and I'm taking a 5 a.m. flight back, and I finally made it to the beach. So no excuses, not any apologies, but that's part of the work we do here too. So thank you, everybody, and I'll pass it on to Tegan now. Take care.
Thank you so much, Michael. So glad that you could join us, and also Gerald Torres sent his apologies, who also helps lead the center, that he couldn't join us. As Michael said, we are here to talk about this Land Justice and Land Trust Toolkit, specifically today to talk about agricultural conservation and cultural respect easements and understanding them. So really honored that we have these amazing guests with us today. This Land Justice and Land Trust Toolkit was developed in partnership with the Aspetuck Land Trust and through the Center for Business Environment. Reggie St. Fort Collin was our main point of contact for the Aspetuck Land Trust, who's an amazing Bridgeport-based activist, and we worked together with their whole organization to develop this over a number of years. And the toolkit has 9 tools in it, and we tried to really make it so that each section has a little piece on describing what the tool is, and then lots of links to organizations and resources and different types of materials to help you actually understand more, learn from people who are experts in implementing these things, and have some of the tools you need to actually put these things into practice. And so the idea is that there's a whole spectrum of things that either land trusts or individuals and organizations can do to implement land justice. And so today we're going to be talking about one of those areas, the various types of easements. So thank you all for joining us, and I'm going to hand this over to Yao Darko, who is joining us from the Connecticut Land Conservation Council, and Yao is going to be our moderator today.
Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. My name is Yao, and I'm the Director of Grants and Programs with the Connecticut Land Conservation Council, CLCC for short. I'm honored to serve as the moderator for today's conversation. This discussion is deeply connected to work CLCC began nearly 2 years ago, exploring the challenges and barriers to farmland access and ownership, particularly for BIPOC farmers and first-generation producers. This work also examined opportunities to support more equitable land transitions through different cooperative land ownership models and alternative land tenure strategies. This ultimately would culminate in a report for the Connecticut Department of Agriculture, which highlights some of the land justice tools we will be discussing today, especially how easements can create pathways to access sovereignty and stewardship. With that, I'd like to invite our panelists to briefly introduce themselves. Please share your name, your organization, and what your organization does. Let's start with you, Ramona.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ramona Peters. I'm also known as Nosa Pocket. And I'm speaking here from Mashpee, Massachusetts on Cape Cod. And I am the president and founder of the Native Land Conservancy. We're a national organization that conserves land. We're with the emphasis on Indigenous access and rematriation.
Thank you so much, Ramona. Let's go over to you, Cherie.
Good afternoon, and so glad to be here to join this conversation. My name is Cherie Jzar, and I'm a first-generation farmer. My farm is in Charlotte, North Carolina. The name of it is Deep Root CPS Farm, and CPS stands for Community Planning Solutions. We have a regenerative farm here, and we were one of the first farmers in the Carolinas to partner with the Conservation Fund in their Working Lands program.
Last but not least, Aaron.
Hi, I'm Aaron Lefland. I'm the deputy director at the Connecticut Land Conservation Council, so one of Yao's partners in crimes over at CLCC. We are the service organization for roughly 120 land trusts in the state of Connecticut, and my work there primarily focuses on capacity building efforts for those land trusts.
Thank you all for the brief introductions. I'll turn things over to Aaron, who will walk us through the basics of easements and how they function.
All right, get my screen share. All right, can you guys see the screen okay?
Yes.
Perfect. All right. So as Yao mentioned, I'm just going to give a brief overview of what easements are. We thought that it would be helpful to just make sure we have a baseline understanding of what we're talking about when we talk about easements. And I'll preface all of this by saying I'm not an attorney, and I also know that I'm skipping over a lot of detail and nuance about easements. Again, this is just intended to be an introduction and help get us all on the same page and using some of the similar vocabulary. Even in that respect, though, I understand that not everybody even uses the term conservation easement. In Massachusetts, they call them conservation restrictions. So we'll do our best to just align our vocabulary here. But for the sake of this presentation, we'll be referring to them as easements. Most of us in the land trust world are most familiar with conservation easements, but we're going to be talking about some different ways that easements have been adapted and used to address issues beyond sort of ecological conservation. And a common thread across all of these different types of easements is that they are a legal agreement that limits the use of a property to protect some value. And as we'll see, the value that we're trying to protect really varies across these different types of easements. They are both voluntary, meaning that the easement holder and the landowner entered into this agreement on a voluntary basis, but they're also permanent, meaning that once the easement is in place, they carry forward in perpetuity regardless of who owns the property and if that ownership changes hands. With easements, a landowner keeps ownership of the property itself, but gives up certain rights, and those rights are held by the conservation easement owner. And then those rights are generally held by either a land trust or a government agency. But again, there's different ways that this can be structured, and we'll talk about some of those differences through this panel. Oh, sorry. There we go. So here's just a quick graphic of kind of how this might play out. Again, this is sort of showing how a typical conservation easement might work, but you as a landowner, when you purchase property, generally have a number of rights with that property. And so you might be able to develop or subdivide a property. You might be able to create or maintain trails on the property. You might be able to hunt there, cut firewood, maybe even mine or quarry the property, farm it, exclude public use. These are all different rights that you as a landowner have. And in a legal sense, this is sort of called the bundle of sticks analogy. And through the process of creating a conservation easement, you're effectively transferring those sticks or those rights to the easement holder. And so what that might look like is you give up the right to divide or develop or subdivide the property. You give up the right to mine or quarry the property or alter the hydrology. And those are kind of the fundamental parts of a conservation easement. In their loosest term, those are generally what are given up, but conservation easements can be drafted to be more restrictive than that. So in that case, a conservation easement might prevent the cutting of firewood. It might prevent the ability to farm if it's more of like a wildlands easement. It might prevent the creation of trails or other forms of active management on the property. So there's a real spectrum within conservation easements. And another important aspect of easements in general is that it's important to know that they reduce the appraised fair market value of the land. So if a property is valued at $1 million is the example here, and you give up certain rights on that property, like the ability to subdivide it or develop the property, that inherently reduces the value of the property. And so in one sense, that can be a good thing. It can be used as a way to expand access and preserve affordability. Through this panel, I think we're also going to talk about how this can be a bit of a double-edged sword and talk about some of the equity challenges that come along with that reduction in the property's value. So through today's panel, we'll be talking about a number of different easement models, including affirmative agricultural easements, buy, protect, sell models, community land trust linked easements, cultural respect easements, and commons-based easements. And the one thing that I'd like you to take away from all of this, and again, that big caveat about how easements can really vary, is that they're not neutral tools. They really reflect the values that we embed into them. And depending on the language that's used and the values that are trying to be protected, we can achieve certain things and also exclude certain things. And that's a really interesting conversation about what we're designing easements to do, and if doing them a certain way also prohibits things from happening. So we'll be getting into a lot of that nuance through our discussion today. And so with that, I'll hand it back to Yao.
Thank you, Aaron, for grounding us in the language that will shape this conversation. We will now shift to our panel discussion. For full disclosure, the questions I'll ask are multiple questions masquerading as one. I'll lay them all out, but feel free to respond to whichever part speaks to you first. I can always circle back to anything that gets left behind. So to start us off, how do you define land justice, and what does it look like in your work, or what could it look like in practice? As part of your response, can you speak to what is broken or unjust about our current system of land access and ownership? Ramona, may you start us off?
I'm going to have to say, first of all, that I have not thought about what we do in terms as land justice. When I think of the land or how I know the land, she's so grossly misunderstood, and there's so many layers and layers of lack of humility in relation to the land that I when I try to think of how humans, or at least the culture, has treated it since colonization, that in terms of justice, that went out the window in 17th century. As far as equally sharing and the ability to move about freely, to protect it and nurture the resources, so-called resources, or even looking at the earth as a resource is really kind of grotesque, but for me. So I guess when to think about land justice in the contemporary terms, I can't say that I really put my mind to it, so I'm going to pass that. You know, it's yes, it's some of these some things are really convoluted that it's hard for me to speak to it, you know.
Yeah. And I would say, to your point, if you don't think of the work you do as land justice, how do you talk about it? How do you describe it to those who are not familiar with it?
Well, we've been calling it land rescue. Is to prevent further development, destruction, abuse. Yeah. So we call it land rescue.
Okay. Cherie or Aaron?
Well, I was going to piggyback on what Ms. Peters was saying, because the idea of this colonial logic that treats land as a commodity, and instead thinking of the land as a living relative, right? And so when she was saying to rescue, like it's our relative that we feel is a precious commodity that we need, right, in our family. And so we have this huge responsibility to rescue it from this sort of commodity practice. And for me, land justice is really about having maybe more control, democratizing how land is used. Instead of just thinking of it as who owns the deed, we need to be thinking about who shapes the decisions about how land is used, who reaps the wealth, where is that concentrated, who has the ability to steward culture on land, you know, in terms of land use. And then, you know, the enjoyment of the ecology communities that may not own the deed to the land. If the land is being used in a way that doesn't sort of serve them or benefit them, then that's unjust. So, you know, a framework of equity or some thinking holistically about land, I think, is what for me is land justice. So when as a farmer, I think of being a steward, right, of land. Even though under this colonial model, yes, we will be the owners per se, but our ownership is just for a very, very short period in the time of this world, this land. So that's kind of how I measure it. And you know, the yardstick of whether or not we are being just with the land is, how does it benefit all? You know, is it just benefiting one for the sake of wealth while harming others environmentally, harming the land environmentally? So, so that's kind of how I think of it.
Aaron,
Right.
Ramona.
So when I was talking about mentioning the colonial era, so it was a monarch. The system was different that colonized this country, at least and landed in my homelands. And there, even real estate law was created here in Massachusetts. It's the birthplace of this whole idea that each person can have their own. Well, each man can have his kingdom. And so that began this whole, you know, holding something out as mine and away from everyone else. And as even in the, probably, I don't know, you know, I haven't spent much time in Europe to see what that history showed as to how people regarded the land, that they didn't own it. They knew that, but the king did, or you know, and so how did they behave then? Was things more equitable, at least as we all are here? You know, I don't know, but that's not how they behaved here once they became their own kings.
Aaron, would you like to respond to anything Cherie or Ramona said?
Yeah, as both were talking, the word restoration kept coming to mind, sort of restoring connections between people and place, restoring communities and their access to land and the way that they interact with the land. So I think as we think about conservation and coming from sort of the land trust community, thinking about how land trusts interact with their community and then interact with the land, it's a lot of that sort of restorative element of what that can be applied to conservation. So just yeah, that seemed to be a theme that was coming through.
Mhm. Okay. And for our audience, if you have any questions, please use the Q&A function to add your questions into to add your questions, and we will hopefully get to them. And if not, we'll hopefully get to them. Okay, let's see. Okay. Erin shared an overview of the different types of easements, and I want to shift our attention, starting off with you, Cherie. In your own words, what is an agricultural easement? How are you currently working with these kinds of easements? What are some of the benefits and challenges? And in your view, do agricultural easements help us move toward land justice? And if so, how?
Yeah, so basically a agricultural easement is a voluntary, as Erin shared, but it's a permanent agreement that limits the development rights of the land, and it limits it and puts the landowner in a place where they're working it for productive agriculture. And while, me as a farmer or our family as a farmer will be farming the land, we will be restricted permanently in the future from subdividing that land and using it for any other use. So if you think about it, it's like basically if you have a bundle of property rights, it just sort of takes them off. It drops the market value. So the land that we are working on, the land that we're working on that will have the permanent easement is a 44-acre farm in Union County, North Carolina. And much of the land, much of those 44 acres will be under the agricultural easement. It was purchased at a value of, I think, $1.8 million. And after all of the conservation easements are put on and sort of a bundle of things from the state and federal government and local conservation entity, that land value will drop significantly, which it makes the land more affordable. I don't have $1.8 million. I wish I did to purchase land. And so making it affordable means that not only is it affordable for us to have stewardship over, but it will also help us to scale up our business, whereas we wouldn't have that much of a debt burden on our business. So the Conservation Fund has an awesome program where they identify land that's in danger of being developed, maybe farmland, and their whole goal is to preserve that farmland and match it with a farmer who will continue to work the land as a working land. And then they offer what they call a patient pathway towards ownership. So over time, I think it's a 3 to 5 year period, is when we're right on the land, we're working it, and we're able to have our business, making money, so that at the end of the term, once the easements are on, we will actually transfer ownership from the Conservation Fund to our business entity at a reduced rate, not at the same rate as it was purchased, and it will have the easements on it. So it will limit us from, in the future, being able to, develop housing or make it a commercial use or anything. It will always be working lands. And I think the justice part of that is they were very, very wise to understand, the history of land disposition in our country, where I'm a first generation farmer and I did not inherit, acres of land from my relatives. A troubled history of land being dispossessed from Black and Brown people in the US and indigenous people. And they had a goal to conserve farmland and make it available to those who were the most vulnerable in terms of lacking access to land. And so to me, they have a justice element or equity element built into this program, which is going to benefit any working farmer, any farmer who's interested in having this pathway of accessing land.
Mhm. You reference sort of the drop in the market value as when the agricultural easement is placed. How do you sort of navigate that tension between trying to, as a first generation farmer, build generational wealth versus, the restriction in the value, which further down the line will keep this land as a working farm?
Yes, that is a challenge, right? Is because, if I were to have inherited farmland and were working that land and it passed on to my son, who is also a farmer, he could use the value, if it's a fair market value of that land, to sell a part off to, pay for his son to go to college or his daughter. But because we have this conservation easement, he may not be able to do, well, he won't be able to do that. So this land won't be at the same value for him. However, many conservation easements, especially the agricultural ones, there's a plan that you can put in place where you really can sketch out where you would like housing to go. Not all of the land will have to be under the agricultural easement. And so that negotiation can happen so that we can have some level of control for the future building of wealth. But that, in general, that's just an acceptance we have as understanding that these easements are there. We won't have the maximum right. One of the things that we hope, like the prayer that I have, is that our entity that we've created, Deep Root CPS Farm, is so successful that we are cultivating generations of farmers into the future that I can't even imagine right now, right? What kind of community we will have in terms of building wealth, stewarding land, and restoring our place in this agricultural field here in America. So that's one of the things I hope, but one of the realities is, how we understand generational wealth in terms of capital that comes from the land. That won't be, but there's so much wealth, right? that my children's children will have, because they are going to have the ability to steward land as long as they want, as long as that easement is in place.
Mhm. Aaron, Ramona, would you like to respond to anything that Cherie said?
Well, in terms of the what we use here in Massachusetts, and I believe it changes from state to state, I'm not sure, but we've had to put an easement on a piece of land, and we use a building envelope inside of that CR or CE in your case, so that a structure could be put there, like a residence or a facility for, visitation, a visitor center or all sorts of different things, a barn. It could be whatever you need, but it needs to be thought of and planned out when you craft that CR or the CE. I understand the temptation to, and it happens every generation, to sell land. as a Native American, I can tell you it's not a good idea. It never comes back. And at least in our area, we could never afford it, in Cape Cod or in the vineyard or anywhere our people. Once one of our relatives sells it, it's gone forever. The benefit part, I would say also, is that there's also a tax reduction or no taxes needing to be paid on that land. And that my people have lost land to tax taking in mass. I mean, through the centuries, it is, when we became a town and we lost our other rights, there was like a big sweep of tax taking. Because part of the being unable to fully engage in the employment via racism, we didn't have the funds to pay the taxes, and so gone. It was just taken like that. So there's a benefit and there's a loss. Of course, there's pros and cons of everything, but I'll just add that to what Cherie said.
Aaron.
Yeah, I'll just add, I think one of the things that's interesting about the way this is laid out in the toolkit is the term affirmative agricultural easement, and kind of going back to that concept of how we draft things and what language we put into these agreements. The word affirmative there is really important because it means that the land is not only protected as farmland, but will actively be farmed. And so that's a distinction between other, perhaps less affirmative types of agricultural easements where you reserve the right to farm, but you don't actually have to do it. And that can often lead to sort of hobby farms or gentleman farms. And if we're thinking about keeping farmland as active farmland being actively farmed, that is an important distinction in a language that we need to consider when we're drafting these easements.
Mm-hmm.
And I just wanted to add one more, I think sometimes even I try to get myself out of thinking about this as an individual benefit or a benefit to my family. To have a land that's an active farm, right? For generations, that is producing, in our case, as a regenerative farm that produces food for our community, that's securing a source of food for your community through this partnership with the farmer and with a conservation fund. And that's a benefit to the whole versus an individual or an entity. And I think sometimes we don't think of it that way because we're so, thinking about this individual benefit, but it's a community benefit, which to me has a lot more value of securing food for people in the community. And I don't even know if we can even gauge, in terms of money today, what that value might be.
Mm-hmm. I think what I love hearing is, and Aaron highlighted this in his last slide, is that easements aren't neutral. We embed our values into them. I think that's a wonderful segue to you, Ramona, in terms of cultural respect easements. In your own words, what are they? How are you working with these types of easements? What opportunities and obstacles have you faced trying to advance these? And similarly, how do you see cultural respect easements advancing? And I'm going to use your words, land rescue instead of land justice.
Okay, well, thank you, Jan. The cultural respect easement, that is the value, is that our culture is respected. We borrowed this idea from some tribes out in California who started it, and we sort of wordsmithed it to work for the Northeast area, and it's actually not geographically specific, doesn't need to be, but the idea of cultural respect, to request it, didn't go quite as we expected or hoped at first. And it has begun to take some momentum here. It's a tool for conservation that it does not actually, it doesn't require that a deed is transferred. It is just a giving access to a group of people, and in this case, indigenous people who has some cultural ties to that land. Now, we are here in Wampanoag territory, we are, fishing, hunting, and planting people. And we don't have all of those spaces anymore. We don't have access to medicinal plants, or some of even our places where our ancestors were buried. We've lost access to those locations. And so by asking landowners to share and allow us to have access is what this document is. And it does go into the Registry of Deeds. It does not decrease the value of your land. But it does go on into perpetuity. It's an easement. And so, and this is, we want our future generations to remain capable of going to these areas. And so it becomes part of our oral tradition that this particular neighbor or our friend or, and when it is relationship building, each one of these agreements or arrangements are carefully crafted together with, to make sure that the giver of the easement feels comfortable. And they describe where, people have access and on which pathway or where they park their vehicles or how much can they take. We have a policy that goes along with this to ensure that this sustainable harvest is, if it is harvesting anything. So in some cases, we require different materials for our cultural needs. And those two are just not where we live. And so that's the basis of it. It does rescue it isn't in a form, it's actually helping us rescue our culture, which needs land. It needs space. And many tribes are suffering the same thing. In fact, I also believe that in which we hope to expand these cultural respect easements to include areas around urban environments where there are many more indigenous people or Native Americans than, I think it's up to almost 80% of our people now are living in urban areas. And so they need space to do different things, to recover some of the culture that they lost from their reservations or their homelands. And so the Native Land Conservancy is hoping to help facilitate that. So I'm going to stop there in case there's questions.
Yeah. Before I ask more questions, Cherie or Aaron, would you like to add or respond to anything Ramona said? Okay. So in terms of the relationship building aspect of it, what are some of the fears that come with it, both from your perspective and from, as you said, the person given or the landowner given access?
Right. Well, that's been that's the hard information to get from people who are afraid. They don't want to tell us what they're afraid of. And so it's been years of study, listening carefully, so we can't really fix it if we don't know what it is.
Mm-hmm.
But in our guessing, first maybe numbers, like they're thinking that the whole tribe is going to come out there. And it's unfortunately and sadly, our population is very low. There's not many Native people in the whole country. It's like less than 1% of the population. If you even know a Native person, it's rare. And so this is not so there's not going to be a, trampling going on or anything like that. But there are, happily, there are traditionalists and people who are involved in the culture who prefer to use and stick to the old ways in some instances and want to keep some things like that alive. And so those few people need access, and they can choose an area. Well, so where cedar trees grow. If someone has that and we say, could we go in and get some saplings, at once a year or twice a year, when it's the right time for that species of plant, we go in and we harvest and we come out and we don't visit the rest of the year. So it's simple like that, but the obstacles about ideas of how many people there are. I wondered too about even owning the idea that we aren't respected. I don't know. I don't know what I thought about, are we insulting people by saying, asking for respect? I don't know. It's not intended to be like that. It is more thinking that when we have little placards that we put on our tree markers when we have a respected area, that we put those out there so our people can find them and know that they are safe to go there. So we were really thinking about it as a projection. I think in general, when I've seen whenever our people get off the pavement and go into the woods, people get afraid. And I'm not sure what that comes from, old movies or something. But we are constantly, the police and the wardens, everyone's always called whenever so there is a need for it, the easement, so that if we make them with conservation groups mostly, and those folks have agreed through relationship together and discussing things, agreed to help protect us while we're out there and doing ceremony. And they don't have to be part of the ceremony, but they're willing to protect us from other people who may be in the area and don't understand, or the neighbors who suddenly see people who are not white. So there are some fears that I can't explain, but yeah, I guess
but I do sort of love that notion that these cultural respect easements, there is that safety element tied to it. I think often one of the things we talk about, especially at CLCC, sort of representation in the outdoors and in the conservation field. What does that look like? And if having these cultural respect easements can guarantee a level of safety, but also provide whoever is around that a sense that these are the types of faces that are deserve to be on the land or are in relationship with the land. I think that's a wonderful thing. A question came in the chat, and this is for you, Ramona. How are cultural easements enforced across transfers of ownership?
They go with they transfer with ownership. Yeah, it's really about the land and what lives there, not the deed holder necessarily. But once somebody is kind enough to extend that to us, then it stays.
And my next question, and this really, Ramona, I'm going to ask this of you, and Cherie, please jump in. In the context of cultural respect easements, can you help us understand the distinction between exchange and access as it relates to power dynamics and intentions behind land use relationships? And for you, Cherie, I think thinking about this in terms of you mentioned in our previous conversation the difference between a beneficiary and a partner. What are those distinctions for both of you?
So do you want me to?
Ramona, you can start off, but if you like time to think about it, we can go to Cherie. Whoever's ready.
I'm going to think about it.
Well, in terms of the beneficiary versus the partner, I think that is what we made it a point to share with the Conservation Fund, that we wanted to ensure. I mean, there could be no working land without a farmer to work the land, right? And so at the mission and the core goal of the Conservation Fund, which they want to preserve farmland and working land specifically. So to preserve that means you have to partner with the person or entity who's going to work the land. So it's a partnership and not a giver and someone who's receiving. That is very important, especially in justice work, right? We need not to see ourselves as, or see these entities or conservation organizations shouldn't see themselves as a savior, right? As having that complex, that is very important, especially, given the fact, and Aaron kind of shared a little bit of it a while ago, is, sometimes these things can be highly technical and they require a legal entity to help facilitate. And a small farmer may not have the capacity to have a legal team at the table talking to an entity, negotiating what parts of the land has the building envelope and where future plans are for the. So it's got to be a partnership where the goals of both entities of the community will be met whenever this easement is placed on the land and it's being stewarded by the farmer. So for me, that was a no, all this language about what we were doing had to reflect the idea that we were partners. If we care about our earth, Mother Earth, and we want to continue to see our right relationship with the land, we need to really see all of our responsibilities. And it takes parts and pieces to make that happen, just like someone is a donor to the Conservation Fund, right? And the Conservation Fund has the ability to formulate the team, to put the team on the ground, to try to find the land. And there's so many different parts where the working land, the farmer, has the relationship to steward that land, to treat it well. There's in the conservation easement, there will be language in there about how the working land is farmed. They're not conserving that land so that I can be putting harsh chemicals on the land. So, there's a partnership, and that partnership requires many different entities, and we are just one of them.
Ramona.
Right? Could you rephrase the question or repeat the question?
Yes, so in the context of cultural respect easements, can you help us understand the distinction between exchange and access? With access being viewed more as a one-way relationship where someone is just given, while exchange is more of mutual respect.
Mhm. I thought that's what you said. Right, when we first started, we called them cultural respect agreements. And there was a struggle going on because the conservation groups that we were seeking to have a respect agreement with wanted something in exchange. And they wanted cultural programs for their, for their organization. And no, that's not what we had intended. We weren't looking for so the word agreement denotes transaction. And so we changed it to easement because that's really what we're looking for is access. And a respectful access for our culture to continue. So that was a language. We have lawyers, we have all of those folks that do this with us and for us, or we pay them to do it for us. And yeah, and thank you for mentioning the donors, because there are a number of people who have supported us and our efforts, especially in the cultural respects. I mean, although they don't cost much, but except for the paperwork, and that does. I want to mention too, before I forget, that we make these cultural respect easements extend them to tribes who we're not part of. If we have a donor gives us land that's in someone's territory and there's a nearby tribe, then we do a cultural respect easement with them automatically for any land that we are holding or protecting. So just to mention that.
Thank you, Ramona. So we are approaching our time. And so I would like to direct this last question to Aaron, and please, Ramona and Cherie can join in quickly. So all three of you are working with land trusts in different ways. And what ways can land trusts use easements as a tool to support equitable access to land for historically marginalized communities? And beyond using the easement as a tool, how can land trusts show up as true partners in land justice or land rescue work in ways that are relational rather than transactional, extractive, or performative? Let's start with you, Aaron.
Yeah, I think you said it perfectly at the end there. It's about building relationships and listening, understanding the needs of different parts of your community and sort of sub-communities in a way. I think the really exciting thing about this toolkit is it's really a menu. It's a toolbox of different ways that land trusts can approach their work. And there's been a sort of traditional way that conservation has happened for decades, and it's really exciting to see some of these new, I don't know, different approaches to how we use existing models of things, but adapt them to the challenges that we're seeing in communities and that different populations and demographics are experiencing. And so land trusts are community-centered organizations. They have a finger on the pulse of the area that they're serving, and the more that they can listen to the folks in those communities, understand their needs, and then think creatively about how some of these tools can be applied to their work, to me is really exciting. And I think there's a lot of possibility to expand the work that land trusts are doing using these tools, and grow better conservation into the future.
Cherie or Ramona?
Yes, I was going to say, in our case, we're farmers, and we were farming 7 acres in Charlotte, and our goal was to expand food access for the community that we lived in, which would impact Black and Brown folk because of the lack of food access. And we were limited in our ability to do that on the land we were currently stewarding. And then along comes a partner who understood the challenges of a first-generation farmer, a Black farmer, and had an awesome opportunity to partner with us so that we could deepen our impact in the community. And we were able to expand that partnership, and we've expanded our operation, and so our production has increased, and we're providing more food to the community exactly like we wanted to. And I don't know if we could have been on that path so rapidly if we didn't have the Working Lands program to do that. And the work that we do in the community is trying to increase others who want to take the same, leap of faith and partnership with the Conservation Fund in the Carolinas. And so, like, as Aaron said, this idea of really thinking about how to impact or be just in a system that has not always been so just, with creating opportunities like this for the community. I think that's the biggest benefit. And is such a great thing. This tool is in fact in our case helping to provide greater access to food because it provided access to land, and yeah.
I would say I'm very happy to still to be able to live long enough to see that the social climate has changed enough to extend to us. It's been a long, hard road, and it's I was losing hope actually about what was going to happen to our folks, and that our agriculture would die out. I mean, there's all these dismal things that can happen when our people are not given some assistance. We're quite capable, but we have to have the, we have to be given enough freedom to activate, to do, what we would do naturally. Fish, hunt, plant, enjoy the earth, rejuvenate ourselves, sing and dance with everybody. We if we had that friendship, and conservation groups are offering some of that friendship. I'm very happy to have found that and actually some homeowners, other people are as well, and municipalities could do it as we have one municipality that we do have a CRE with. So it's beginning, and the sun rises in the east and it moves westward. So let's hope that it'll just flow, flow along with this beautiful beginning.
Thank you all for sharing your time and your insights with us. To our audience, please don't leave yet. Zoe's gonna come off mute and on camera and share with us some closing remarks. We're gonna leave 15 minutes for Q&A after Zoe shares her remarks.
Thank you so much, Yao, and thank you to Cherie, Ramona, and Erin for such a wonderful discussion. It was such an honor to hear from you all today, and to our audience members, thank you. I'd like to also send out a warm welcome, thank you to all of the many people that put this toolkit together. That includes Phoebe Herring, Katie Michaels, Reggie St. Fort Collin, Professor Gerald Torres, Kristen Berendrecht Ludwig, and then all of the reviewers of the guide, and of course the utmost gratitude to Tegan Engel, who not only helped this guide come together, but who also helped this webinar come together. I just wanted to announce to everyone that this is the first of 3 webinars, with the next 2 happening later this month and the beginning of next month. We hope that you all can join us. I'm going to drop a link to register for the second webinar, Building and Supporting Community Land Trusts, in the chat. That will be on June 27th. And then our final webinar will be Understanding Land Back as a Tool for Land Justice, moderated by Chuck Sams, on July 17th, and more information to come from that. But for now, we'll move on to questions. So again, feel free to use that Q&A function, and we'll start reading those out. But thank you all so much.
The first question is for you, Cherie. How did you connect with the Conservation Fund?
So I learned about the work of the Conservation Fund because they held a engagement meeting with local farmers. The Conservation Fund has been, they have farmers that they partner with in Atlanta and Chicago, and I think they're moving into the Carolinas, but they have been really good about boots on the ground, talking to local farmers, trying to identify any farmers who may need the expansion. So that's how I first learned of them.
Next question is for you, Ramona. Speaking of right partnership, have you seen cultural respect / rematriation easements that allow for tribes to construct on site, perhaps not housing or large buildings? That would be cool, but storage for supplies needed for ceremony, hunting, fishing, indigenous preservation practices, etc.?
I have not witnessed that yet, but it certainly can happen if the landowner is willing to oblige it.
Mhm.
Something that can be worked out.
The next is a question slash comment. I worry that requiring the owner to farm could potentially be problematic for people who age and become disabled to remain safe and have continued access for something that they have paid for and worked for. Would anyone like to respond to that? I can read it again.
I'm not gonna pretend to know the answer to this, but I think it just goes into the flexibility that can be included in drafting an easement. Um, the active requirement to farm might have a clause that like a 5-year gap is okay, or I mean that might just be necessary to rest certain fields on the property and things like that. So again, I think I think it was Cherie that said like it can get really technical when you're drafting these easements, and so it's impossible to predict the future entirely. But thinking about those ways to kind of future-proof an easement during the drafting process, that would certainly be one of those things that might get included there.
Yes, and I was going to add that's one of the things that many farmers who are working with conservation groups, they spend a lot of time in deep discussion with family about the future that they may not be able to even imagine. And some of these the level of flexibility that needs to be considered in writing of the easements can cover a whole lot of things, including that very thing that the land rests for a while because of XYZ situation. But the whole idea of it being working land is that it's not tied to the individual or the entity at the moment that the easement is put on. It's really, it's to me, it's about the community. It's a commitment to the community that the land should continue in a way. So if you look at it from a perspective of, at least I don't, that, my individual self will be on the hook, or my individual self will be on the hook if something were to occur. It really is not in this true spirit of what it's about, because it is about the community and in the land itself. In that case, I'm taking a big risk, and any other farmer who enters into a conservation easement partnership with a working lands program through a conservation group is also taking a big risk, but it's going to be worth it, I think.
For Ramona, have you worked with any farmers or private landowners to establish a cultural respect easement? And are there elements that are different there?
We have we haven't finished it, but we have requested that we plant certain species in areas that we, that are that plant are prefers. When there's places that we don't have access to that would be preferable for the plant, and that it could, be happy. So that's a request to plant. But as far as, agriculture, no, we are holding a farm in Wisconsin for some Anishinaabe people who are actively farming it. But it's not a cultural respect easement. It is, it's not that. So we do easements, we do CRs, or we call it in Massachusetts, we do conservation easements. We receive land, we purchase land at sometimes that needs to be rescued. So we do everything that our conservation groups do, with the addition of the CRE.
Next question to anyone on the panel. Are there any organizations you'd suggest looking into that are leading important work or elevating underrepresented conversations in this space?
Hmm. I would say that there are a lot of state lands and federal lands that could be more open to cultural respect easements. It does take work. There needs to be responsible parties on both sides that are contact, that you can rely on. And so it's not really simple, but it is something that can be done.
I believe the toolkit itself has in each of these different sections sort of organizations that are at the forefront of some of these different topics. So that'd be one place to look. And yeah, I need to rack my brain a little bit about this some more, but would be happy to help disseminate a list of ones that come to mind after the webinar if we can do that.
And in North Carolina, there's an entity called the Black Family Land Trust that I know has worked some with this. There's also the National Black Farmers Association. And then there's the Land Loss Prevention Project. I think they're doing some work nationally in South Carolina. But those are the ones that I know of that are actually having these types of conversations about land access and conservation easements.
One more question for you, Ramona. How can non-Indigenous land trusts best steward cultural respect easements? We can include stipulations for this in our easements, but should we be working with Native Land Conservancy or similar organizations to make sure we are upholding cultural access appropriately?
That's a good question. I would suggest yes, that if it is this organization, this conservation group is nearby a tribal entity, then they should work with them about their needs and see what they can do in that way. The Native Land Conservancy is also, we prefer that the tribal people ask us to say, we want access to this river or this burial grounds. I mean, we've had a number of calls from different people that are asking, how do we do that? How can we do, and so we do help the best way we can with fostering those and finding those nearby conservation groups that can be in partnership. So it's not just we're going to give you this cultural respect, but it is a great thing if any of them want to say to a tribal entity that we do respect the culture of Indigenous people, and we would invite you to utilize our space. That's a beautiful gesture. It's more than a gesture. Energetically, it can help change this on many things historically.
There are no more questions. So does anyone want to have any concluding thoughts or leave the audience with anything?
I'd just like to say thank you for allowing me to share and share space here with all of you.
Yes. Me too. It's been quite a pleasure. I hope we were helpful.
Any last words, Aaron?
No, just reiterating the thanks. And I've learned a lot through this process and just sitting in conversation with you all. So thank you. Thank you to folks tuning in, and especially the folks that put the toolkit together for us to base this on.
Yeah, thank you all so much for, again, sharing your time, your insights, and for the wonderful discussion. And I'd like to invite either Tegan or Zoe to close us out.
I'm just so honored to all of you for offering your time and your wisdom and speaking from your hearts about this very important relationship with land and the ways that we're trying to do this work. So thank you all so much. And there's been a number of requests for information. So the link with the toolkit will also take you to the Yale Center for Environmental Justice website, and the webinars will be listed there. And we will also send them out to everybody because we have your emails from your registration here. So just thank you all so much. Thank you, Ms. Ramona. Thank you, Cherie. Thank you, Erin. And thank you, Yao. And of course, thank you, Zoe, for all of your hard work to organize. Many blessings to everybody.